Well, as Solomon moves on into verse 25, he moves from guarding what comes out of your mouth by guarding what goes in through your eyes and what you see. The mouth, the lips are obviously the expressive part of our being, although oftentimes the eyes do have an expression. You can see people who outwardly are laughing, but their eyes aren't laughing, as we say. The eyes do communicate, but not so much as the mouth, and nor as much as the facial features do. We call it the body language that communicates. But what we really have to concern ourselves with the eyes is not trying to communicate with them, but really what we allow to come in through the gateway of our eyes. And that's where Solomon says in verse 25, let your eyes look straight ahead, fix your gaze directly before you. Here again, we have the example of reiteration where he repeats the same concept with different words, different phrases. But what is he talking about when he talks about your eyes and your gaze? I love the Amplified Version's translation of this passage. It says, let your eyes look directly ahead. In other words, he says, think about the direction that you're focusing your eyeballs. And he says it should be toward the path of moral courage. You know, we live in an age where moral courage is becoming rare. When I look at many people in the public arena, in the political arena in particular, I see that there are a lot of people who mouth talking points, but they don't have any real principles or values. There's no path of moral courage that I see in their life. I see them simply putting their finger to the wind and determining which way it's blowing, and then they try to blow with it, you know, and to ride whatever wave of popularity is going on at the moment. And that's why you find them really contradicting themselves over time. If you listen to what they said 5-10 years ago and you listen to what they're saying today, they haven't just had a change of mind, they've had a change of universe, so that they're saying things that are completely opposite of anything they said before without giving us any explanation. It would be helpful if a person says, you know, I used to think this, but I've come a long ways. Now I think that. I was wrong before, but I think I'm correct now. But I know that I hold all of my opinions with a certain degree of incredulity because I know I can be wrong. So the whole point is that this idea that when he talks about looking directly ahead, keeping our gaze focused, he's talking about looking for the path of greatest moral courage that you can take. Live courageously, and not just by doing things like jumping off high places or committing stupid tricks that will get you on a YouTube video or something like that. No, he's talking about you're looking at the really major choices, the moral decisions and the ethical decisions that we have to make every day, whether we're going to lie, cheat, steal, hate, murder, whatever it is. We have to sit down and make decisions about how we're going to interact with the tough things of this life. And he says you need to do it with a courage based upon your moral convictions. Moral convictions, I would say, that are based upon God's truth, God's word. And so God's word informs me on my morals and my ethics, and it decides how I react. So that even when it comes to issues like politics, I mean, politics are areas where moral courage is desperately needed. We need people who are voting for what is best, not just what will benefit them personally the most. And so it's amazing to me because I find that there are those people out there, you know it as well, who are really striving to accomplish things within the legal arena that they know are just untrue. I was watching a documentary the other day where the lawyer kept on insisting upon something that he knew wasn't untrue, but if the truth were really to be stated, his client would suffer, and so he was willingly, knowingly, consciously lying. And we're told that well, that's the obligation of the lawyer. That's where we've come. I would simply say that instead of striving to establish what is true, we just try to see what we can get away from. So the client is guilty. He's guilty as sin, and it's obvious he's guilty, and yet he and his lawyer are lying, knowing that they're lying, because the fear of getting in trouble and having to pay the consequences of that decision are more terrifying to them than having to answer to God. And that's the thing they're missing, because there is another judge, as Moses told Israel. He said, tell the judges that they need to be just, they need to be right, because there is a judge who is higher than them who will hold them accountable for the things they do and say. I think there's a lot of our judges today who are especially on the federal bench who need to understand that truth, because they're using the power of the federal judiciary to promote their own social and political agendas, things they think will further their careers, not things that are good and true and right. That's my opinion. But again, he says, look directly ahead towards things, follow the path of moral courage. And then it goes on to say in the Amplified, and let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you. In other words, be focused on the direction that you're moving, and do it with integrity. So you're finding the path of moral courage, which also requires the path of integrity. And the word integrity is interesting because it simply means that it's not divided. See, when something is integrated, it means that it's put together. My moral life, my theology, my considerations of what's ethical and what not, they're integrated together with God's word, so they're not inconsistent. And so essentially, he's telling us that we need to fix our eyes and focus our eyes upon things that are morally good and true, and to be courageous about it, and also that things that really create an integration of truth into my life, so that I don't say one thing and do another thing. I don't think one thing and then act in a different way, but though there becomes a consistency that what I believe is really what I live with. And this is more challenging for a lot of people than we may recognize, because we grow up in a world that's full of duplicity, deception, and dishonesty. I mean, I watch TV commercials to study TV commercials, I find them fascinating because they present things in a way that makes us believe things about them that aren't true. So that there's kind of the harmlessness of taking this medication. If you take this medication, it'll fix all these problems. And everybody in the commercial is running around happy and smiling and dancing and full of energy. And yet then they have the list of all the side effects potentially that can come from taking this drug. And all we know is that 10 years down the road, they pull it off the market because they found it's deadly to people. It's this kind of idea that's kind of scary, that it's amazing to find out that the CDC's rule for vaccines is that they don't test them with a placebo or control group. In other words, have a new vaccine, they give it to people. They don't give a fake vaccine to people to see what the difference is. They basically say, well, then we'd be depriving people who need treatment from true treatment. No, you can give the real thing to them after you've proven that it's safe, but instead what they do is they just go out and inject people and then see how it affects the population. That is risky and dangerous and probably unethical, maybe even immoral, because we find that people had a higher rate of dying from COVID if they got the vaccination than if they didn't, which is some of the new findings that are coming out. Well, you understand the point. But here again, what we find is that when Jesus talked about the eye, he said the following in Matthew 6:22, the lamp of the body is the eye. In other words, what enlightens me on the inside is what I allow to come in through my eyes. And if therefore your eye is good, your whole body is full of light. If your eye is full of darkness or is bad, then it's full of darkness. What he's talking about is not whether you have cataracts or not, or whether you're blind or not. What he's talking about is what you allow to penetrate your eyes. You see, basically, you can't necessarily control every image that comes into your brain, but your brain can control what you do with that image. And this is particularly significant for men because men are very visually stimulated. That's why most people who are caught up in a pornography are men, because they are very visual when it comes to relationships. And so as a consequence, you have to realize that there are some things like I think Job said, I made a commitment, a vow with my own heart that I would never look lustfully on a young woman. He just didn't let himself go there. He didn't allow his eyes to go there. And unfortunately, many people, even people my age, have not learned that yet and find themselves dealing with impure thoughts. And sometimes allowed long enough to nurture, they result in impure actions. And I think what we forget is something that Solomon will say later on in the next chapter in verse 21. He says, "For your ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all of your paths." We all stand naked before God. And I think that we lose sight of that and think that when we do something in secret, maybe other people don't see it, but God does. And that's really where the accountability ultimately will come. So, blessings. We'll wrap it up tomorrow because we'll talk about our feet, or the paths that we walk down. Blessings.